Okay, we're gonna talk a little bit about some declaring some variables. Talked last time about using system.out.print line. We'll talk a little bit about what these things are that go inside of those parentheses. So in AP Computer Science, you're gonna have 4 different types of primitive data types. You have an integer, expressed integer, or int. Okay, that's going to hold just integers, so -5. You're going to have doubles, which would hold numbers like 4.37. Those are decimals. You're going to have Boolean, which are either going to be true or false. Okay, we'll talk a lot about Booleans. And the last one, those are the main 3. Character is actually not a primitive type in the AP Computer Science data set. We work with strings when we're working with words. But we need to know, it's useful to know, and we'll talk about how it relates to strings. But that would be like capital A, okay? Or lowercase a, or a % sign, or anything. Could be a 3. Okay, so those are your main types. So a couple things to realize first is double E equals 5. Now, that's not a decimal. 5's not a decimal. But when I compile this, it compiles. What happens is it converts 5 to 5.0, a decimal, and puts it into a double. Okay? That is fine. Now, if I try int s equals 3.7, I'll try to compile that, I get an incompatible type. Possible loss of conversion. Okay? Now, what that means is they don't, you don't want to store a double to an integer in case you wanted to keep these decimals. Because an integer can only hold integers. Okay, so you can do double E equals 5, but you cannot do int s equals 3.7. Okay? Now, let's say I printed out 5 divided by 2. 5 divided by 2, we would hope, would be 2.5. Okay? Well, this is an integer divided by an integer, so I'm going to do integer division. And the way integer division works is it truncates the decimal, which means 5 divided by 2 is 2.5, but the 0.5 goes away. I'm just left with 2, and I'll show you that. And get 2. Okay. Now, how could I make this 2.5? Well, I can make either one of these a 0.0. Because now 5.0 registers as a double divided by an integer. Anytime you do an operation on an integer and a double, it becomes a double. So now this is going to become 2.5. And there we go. Okay. So it also could have made the I could have made that would have worked 2.5. And that would work 2.5. Okay. Now another thing I'll show you is something called casting. And you can cast by putting what type you want it to become in parentheses. So double, 5, 2. Now one thing to realize is this casts before it does division. So it casts 5 to a double, which actually becomes 5.0. Then divides by 2. That will give me 2.5. Okay. That's what we got. Okay. Now, what we have to be careful about, see, I got my system.out.print. Notice you can see if you, in BlueJ, if you highlight this parentheses, it will say, this one's closing this one, this one's closing this one. Okay. Now, what happens here is we're not going to get 2.5 because what happens is parentheses occurs before casting, just like order of operations in mathematics. So we're going to do 5 divided by 2. Integer divided by integer, that's going to give us 2. We're going to cast that to a double. That's going to become 2.0. Okay. And I'll show you a little bit about, that's how integers and doubles work. I'll show you how Boolean works. So I have C equals true. I could do something like C equals not C, which actually is going to come up to something very important here, which is assignment. And what I mean by that is, this is not a mathematical expression that C is equal to not C, because in fact that would never be true, right? The way in Java, or basically any program language works, is what's on the right side is getting assigned to the left side. Okay, so right now C says true. This symbol means not. So not C means false. So now we're assigning false to C. Okay, so now if I print out C, it's going to print out false. Okay? And by the way, if you ever want these to clear, I usually have clear string method call. And I also usually keep unlimited buffering, which wouldn't be a problem now, but if we get into some more extensive programs, it would. But now if I run something again, I'll only get my last call false. Okay? Alright, so the last thing I'll show you in this video is how a string works. Okay, so string is not a primitive type. I showed you the 4 primitive types that we would work with here. But a string is going to be very useful to us. Now a string, notice it does not show up in a different color here. That's because it's not a primitive type. It's not a keyword. This is an object. I'm creating an object of the string class. Now we'll get into what classes and objects mean. But understand right now that string is not a primitive, it's an object. So what strings work are, that was if we want to put several characters together. Okay? It's an array of characters. You don't need to know what an array is, but just think of it as a bunch of characters. And we can put whatever. Okay, so this is combined words with numbers, and that is just fine. So that's what a string is. A string will be a list of or an array of characters put together. Basically any character, as long as it's inside these quotation marks, will be accepted as a string. Okay, so I'll print that off. That'll be the last thing. We have an introduction to ints, doubles, booleans, and now strings. Okay, we won't mention characters very much, but there's my string there.